Imagine losing out on a major promotion, um, not because your work wasn't brilliant and not because you missed a deadline, but literally just because your last name starts with the letter W.
Right.
I mean, in the highly rational, supposedly data-driven world of academic economics, that is not a joke. It's actually a statistical reality.
Yeah, it completely shatters that whole illusion of meritocracy, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because we assume that professional ecosystems, especially academic ones, are these perfectly rational machines that just reward the absolute best ideas. Like you put in the hard work, you gather good data, you publish it, and boom, you succeed.
But when you actually peel back the curtain on how knowledge is produced and like how it's credited,
Hmm,
you find the system that is heavily influenced by something as completely arbitrary as the alphabet.
exactly.
And that bizarre structural flaw is the launch pad for our deep dive today.
Hmm.
We're exploring the really quirky, hyper-competitive, and strangely strategic world of academic co-authorship.
And our source for this is, well, it's arguably one of the most unique papers ever published in a serious journal.
Oh, without a doubt.
It's a peer-reviewed article from a 2015 issue of Economic Inquiry, and it's titled A Few Goodmen, Surname-sharing Economist coauthors.
Right, written by Alan Goodman, Joshua Goodman, Lucas Goodman, and Sarena Goodman.
Yeah,
Four economists who share a last name but are completely unrelated to one another, who basically decided to form an academic supergroup just to write a formal paper about economists who share last names writing papers together.
the premise is deeply funny. I mean, it is. But what makes the source so compelling is how they actually execute it.
Yeah, they don't treat it like a joke at all in the writing.
Not at all. The Goodmans adopt this tone of absolute calm rigor. They apply serious economic analysis. They're crunching massive data sets. They're examining incentive structures, identifying structural biases, all to dissect what is fundamentally just an academic inside joke.
Right. And the mission today is to use this highly unusual paper to really unpack how academic credit actually works, the very real anxieties that professionals have about visibility, and what it all just kind of reveals about human collaboration in general.
Yeah.
But I think to understand why these four unrelated Goodmans went to such extraordinary lengths, we have to look at a massive shift in how the whole field operates first, right? We have to talk about the death of the lone genius.
Yeah, that shift is the bedrock of their entire analysis.
Yeah.
Because if you rewind to, say, the early 1970s, the landscape of economic research was incredibly solitary.
They're very isolated.
Very. The Goodmans point to historical data showing that back then, about 75% of economics articles were single-authored.
Just one solitary scholar, probably in a tweed jacket, sitting in a messy office somewhere, just taking sole credit for an entire theory.
Exactly. But you look at those same metrics in 2012, and that number completely plummeted. Less than 25% of economics papers were single-authored.
Wow, that is a huge drop.
It is. The whole field underwent this structural evolution toward mass collaboration. Suddenly, producing knowledge meant you actually required a team.
Which fundamentally changes the career game. Because if almost everything you produce requires you to team up with other people, then choosing your co-author isn't just about, like, finding someone smart anymore.
Right, it becomes highly strategic.
It becomes a career hazard. You are navigating this totally crowded field where everyone just wants to make sure their specific contribution is recognized. And this brings us back to that letter W that I mentioned earlier and this crazy phenomenon called alphabetical discrimination.
Right, which has been heavily documented by other researchers in the past. In many scientific disciplines, like biology or chemistry, the order of authors on a paper is essentially a map of who did what.
Like a hierarchy of labor.
Exactly. The principal investigator or the lab director is usually listed last. And the junior researcher who physically ran the most experiments, the one who actually wrote the first draft, they're listed first.
So the order is a direct reflection of merit. But economics doesn't do that at all.
No, they don't. In economics, author names are almost universally listed in strict alphabetical order.
That is just wild to me.
It really is. I mean, if your name is Aaron Adams, you are virtually guaranteed to be listed first on every single paper you ever co-author, regardless of how much work you actually contributed.
Wow.
But if your name is Zachary Zeller, you are just permanently anchored to the back of the line forever.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this for a second because it's like picking a dodgeball team, right? But instead of picking the most athletic kid, you're only picking kids whose last names start with Z just so that your name stays at the top of the roster.
What's fascinating here is that researchers have found this isn't just a quirk of formatting. it actually has a massive, measurable impact on human lives.
Really? Like real-world
Oh,
consequences?
absolutely.
Hmm.
Economists with earlier surname initials get tenure faster. They're promoted more frequently. They receive more accolades and recognition throughout their entire
Just
careers
because of the letter.
just because of the letter. Because when a tenure committee or a hiring board is reviewing a CV, they're skimming, and the human brain naturally anchors to the first name it sees on a list.
That makes sense psychologically.
Right. So over a 20-year career, the cumulative psychological advantage of always being the first name people read translates into hard, tangible career capital.
It's like naming your plumbing business AAA Plumbing, just so you show up first in the old yellow pages.
That is exactly what it's like.
It has absolutely nothing to do with how good you actually are at fixing pipes. It is pure structural exploitation. But hold on, if this alphabetical bias is a known, measurable fact, why hasn't the field of economics just changed its rules? Like, why stubbornly stick to the alphabet if it is actively ruining people's careers?
Well, that is the power of institutional inertia.
Right.
You have thousands of journals, universities, citation algorithms, and they've all operated this exact way for a century. To change it, you would need this massive coordinated agreement across the entire global discipline.
Which is never going to happen.
No. And frankly, the people currently in power, the ones making those decisions, they are often the ones who already survived and benefited from that exact system.
Ah, of course. So the flawed system just stays in place. But think about the implications of that for a second. Economists are literally trained to optimize systems and respond to incentive, right?
Right.
So if you are a young, highly rational economist looking for a co-author, all else being equal, you are heavily incentivized to actively seek out colleagues whose last names fall later in the alphabet than yours.
You are structurally encouraged to discriminate against anyone whose last name starts with an A or a B, purely to protect your own visibility.
Which sets up the core tension of the Goodman's paper. Because if the alphabet dictates your success, what happens when you decide to write a paper with someone who has the exact same last name as you?
It seems totally counterproductive.
Right. It neutralizes any alphabetical advantage you might have had, and it just creates endless confusion for anyone trying to figure out who actually did the work.
Exactly. And to investigate why this happens at all, the Goodmans turned to this massive data set. It covered all publications from 1970 to 2012 across 5 of the most prestigious economics journals.
And the sheer volume of potential confusion in that data is staggering. Because out of nearly 9,000 unique economists in that data set, 45% share a surname with at least one other economist.
Yeah, the most common names, unsurprisingly, are Smith, Lee, Brown, Chen, and Miller.
The pool for these shared surname collaborations is huge, but actually identifying the papers where 2 Smiths or 2 Chens actually teamed up, that had to acquire an intense amount of manual labor.
It did.
Because I would argue it sounds nearly impossible. If you try to use a standard academic search engine like Google Scholar for this, it just strokes out completely.
Oh, completely.
Like if you search for Smith and Smith, the algorithm just strips out the and, ignores the duplicate, and hands you tens of thousands of papers written by just a single person named Smith.
Yeah, the digital architecture of academia literally isn't built to recognize this specific type of human collaboration.
So how do they even find them?
That limitation forced the Goodmans to get incredibly creative. They had to rely on scanning raw data matrices, literally line by line. They utilized what they formerly called introspection, asking around. And they were actively monitoring academic rumor boards just to track down famous couples and relatives in the field.
Just manually digging through it all. And through all that digging, they managed to isolate 33 papers written by 28 unique pairs of surname-sharing co-authors.
Right.
And rather than just listing them out like a directory, they organized these anomalies into this really fascinating narrative of human behavior, right? They classified them into 4 distinct categories.
It did. And the most prominent category they found is collaboration born of proximity and partnership.
Married economists.
Yes. When a husband and wife are both operating at the highest levels of the field, they frequently combine forces. You see people like Milton and Rose Friedman co-authoring seminal works. You have Christina and David Romer shaping monetary policy together.
That feels like the most intuitive category, honestly, because if you share a home and you share a dinner table, you're probably already debating these economic models over your morning coffee anyway.
You might as well get academic credit for the conversation, right?
Exactly. But what happens when the collaboration isn't a choice of partnership, but just an accident of genetics?
That leads to their second category, which is siblings. The data set revealed multiple instances of brothers co-authoring papers. A really memorable example they highlight is Sexton and Sexton.
Oh, the twins.
Yes, twin brothers who published this really fascinating paper about conspicuous conservation.
The Prius Halo paper, I love that one. They looked at how when the Toyota Prius first came out, consumers were actually willing to pay a premium for it specifically because its unique, somewhat awkward body shape functioned as this giant driving billboard for their environmentalism.
Right.
Like a standard hybrid Honda Civic didn't offer that same visual bragging, right? It's just a brilliant piece of behavioral economics. But hiding inside the sibling category is a detail that completely stops you in your tracks.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
Because while the Goodmans found numerous brother-brother pairs, their search uncovered 0 sister-sister pairs.
None at all.
None. 0.
It's such a jarring statistic. You have this incredibly niche, lighthearted study about last names, and it just accidentally shines this glaring spotlight on a massive pipeline issue in the field.
It really highlights the historical lack of female representation in the top tiers of economics literature during those decades. It proves that even when you are conducting, very playful analysis, the rigid structural realities of a profession will always reveal themselves in the data.
Oh,
Always. Now, moving from siblings, we look at the third category, which shifts the dynamic across generations. So parent-child co-authorship.
okay.
And statistically, this one is exceedingly rare.
Really? Why would it be rare, though? I mean, if you are an established, tenured professor, wouldn't you just jump at the chance to pull your kid up the ladder and co-author a paper with them?
You would think so.
Yeah.
But you have to look at the disincentives facing the junior researcher, the child, in this dynamic.
Okay.
If you are a young economist and you're trying to prove your own independent brilliance to a tenure committee, co-authoring with your highly famous parent is a massive strategic risk.
Oh, I see. Because the wider academic community is just going to assume that the senior author did all the heavy intellectual lifting.
Exactly. The junior researcher loses the exact credit they desperately need to establish their own independent career.
So that anxiety about invisible credit rears its head yet again. It's literally safer to write with a total stranger than your own legendary father.
Exactly. But there are a few wonderful exceptions that buck the trend. There is a parent-child pairing of Levy and Levy. There is even a grandparent-grandchild team, Modigliani and Modigliani.
Wow.
But the absolute crown jewel of this category is Van Praag and Van Praag.
Yes, the father and daughter team. And what makes them the crown jewel is the actual subject of their paper, right?
Yes.
They co-authored a study titled The Benefits of Being Economics Professor A Rather Than Z.
It is so perfectly meta.
It's amazing. They are a surname-sharing pair who literally wrote a paper investigating the exact alphabetical discrimination that makes their own collaboration so unique to begin with.
Exactly. So we have spouses, we have siblings, and we have generational families. But the Goodman's final category moves away from blood and marriage entirely.
Right.
The fourth taxonomy is simply unrelated individuals who happen to share a campus.
So just two professors who bump into each other in the faculty lounge or like a department meeting, realize they have the same last name, and decide to write together.
Right. The data showed pairs like Rosen and Rosen at Princeton or Chen and Chen at the University of Michigan.
But looking at all these groups, the spouses, the siblings, the campus colleagues, we have to return to the core mystery of this whole thing. Why do any of them do it?
Right.
If alphabetical ordering creates a disadvantage and sharing a name creates all this professional confusion, why are these highly rational economists making a choice that seemingly hurts their individual careers?
This raises an important question, and the Goodmans explain this by bringing in a concept developed by previous researchers known as consumption value.
Wait, let's unpack that term, because consumption value sounds like intense jargon. What does that actually mean in this context?
Well, in traditional economics, models of human behavior usually focus on maximizing productivity, right? You measure the output, like how many widgets a worker produces per hour or how many citations a paper gets.
The end product?
Right. The assumption is that labor is just a cost, it's a burden, and the reward is strictly the output. But consumption value introduces a behavioral economics perspective. It acknowledges that the actual process of working has its own intrinsic value, completely separate from the output.
Oh, so they aren't just optimizing for career capital, they are actually optimizing for their own daily happiness.
Exactly. Sometimes you choose a co-author, not because they are the most strategic mathematical fit for your 10-year portfolio, but simply because you genuinely enjoy spending time with them.
That is so refreshing.
It is. Family members, close friends, or favorite colleagues choose to collaborate because the shared experience of tackling a complex problem together brings them joy. The collaboration itself is a form of consumption.
It is a shockingly wholesome revelation for a discipline that usually prides itself on cold, hard data. But this brings us to the crux of our deep dive. We have explored these four established historical categories of surname sharing. Where do our authors, Alan, Joshua, Lucas, and Sarena Goodman, fit into this framework?
Well, they don't. That is the entire punchline of the paper. They engineered a fifth category purely to claim record.
Just for the brag, they are the first four economist co-authors who share a surname but are completely, entirely unrelated by marriage, by blood, or even by a shared university campus.
And they are meticulous in proving their lack of connection. They dedicate an entire section of the paper just to clarifying that none of them is married to each other, they aren't siblings, and they aren't cousins.
They literally concede that, theoretically they might share an ancestor from centuries ago, but they explicitly state they refuse to spend their own money on DNA testing just to find out.
The way they actually assembled this team is a testament to sheer, stubborn serendipity. Sarena and Joshua happened to overlap in graduate school, where they were constantly mistaken for a married couple or siblings.
Naturally.
Later, a mutual friend introduced Sarena to another graduate student named Lucas Goodman. So then they have three.
But to secure the fourth, they didn't just wait for a chance encounter, right? They literally went to the American Economic Association's member directory, typed Goodman into the search bar, and cold recruited Alan.
It is a completely manufactured anomaly. But to legitimately claim the title of the first four-person surname-sharing team in economics, they had to address a rival claim.
Oh, yes, the drama.
They had to systematically dismantle a four-author paper published back in 2012 by the Skarbeks.
And the takedown of the Skarbek paper is incredibly polite, but it is absolutely ruthless.
It really is. The Skarbek paper was authored by Skarbek, and Skarbek, specifically two brothers and their two wives. But the Goodmans point out two fatal flaws in their rival's claim.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, only the two brothers are practicing economists. The two wives are attorneys. So right out of the gate, it is not four economist co-authors.
Boom. That alone seems like a disqualification, but they go further than that, don't they?
They do. The Goodmans engaged in personal correspondence with David Skarbek, and they uncovered a critical timeline issue. When the four of them actually began the research project, the two women still had their maiden names. The four-way surname matching only occurred because two weddings took place during an exceptionally long peer review process. Therefore, the Goodman state the shared surnames were endogenous to the publication process.
Okay, let's pause on that phrase, endogenous to the publication process. What does endogeneity actually mean here for people who aren't economists?
In economics, an endogenous variable is one that is influenced or caused by other factors within the system you're studying.
Okay.
So the Goodmans are arguing that the Skarbeks didn't start the process as four people with the same name. The sluggish, multi-year reality of academic publishing provided the time for the marriages to happen. The system they were participating in literally caused the name sharing to occur. It wasn't an independent pre-existing condition.
That is a devastatingly nerdy way of saying, you didn't start as four Skarbeks, you just got married while waiting for the reviewers to email you back.
Exactly.
So the Goodmans successfully claimed the crown. But the real genius of their paper isn't just the rivalry. It's that by grouping together, they discovered a way to exploit the ultimate loophole in academic publishing.
This is where their understanding of structural mechanics really shines.
Yeah.
We already discussed alphabetical discrimination. But there is a second systemic bias in academia known as the it et al. Penalty.
And if you are listening to this and you have ever worked on a massive group project at work, you know exactly what this feels like.
Oh, yeah.
Like you do a massive chunk of the labor, but when the project manager presents the deck to the executive team, only the manager's name is on the title slide. And you are relegated to a vague, thanks to the wider team, you are rendered totally invisible.
That is exactly what happens in academic citations. When a paper has three or more authors, journals and other researchers don't want to waste word count typing out every single name every time they reference the work.
Right.
So they list the first author's name, followed by an al, which is Latin for and others.
So if a paper is written by Adams, Baker, Clark, and Davis, every time it gets cited in another journal, it just says Adams et al. Clark and Davis literally disappear from the text.
And that disappearance carries a severe, quantifiable penalty. If nobody sees your name when the paper is praised or referenced, you don't accumulate the psychological status or the professional visibility that actually leads to career advancement. You really suffer for being and others.
But the Goodmans realized something absolutely incredible.
Eddie did.
When their 2015 paper is cited by other researchers, the citation algorithms and the journal formatting rules will inevitably compress it down to Goodman et al.
Right.
And by actively choosing to share a surname, they completely neutralize the penalty.
It is a masterful structural hack. When a reader sees Goodman et al., every single one of them, Alan, Joshua, Lucas, and Sarena, gets equal psychological credit. The et al. Acts as a mirror, reflecting their shared identity back to the reader rather than erasing it.
Here's where it gets really interesting because it is brilliant. And this is exactly why this seemingly niche academic joke matters to you, the listener. Because whether you are navigating the hierarchy of corporate America or trying to get noticed in the arts or grinding away in your own academic field, you are subjected to systems that measure your success in deeply flawed ways.
Absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the systems that govern our professional lives are rarely the perfect meritocracies we want them to be.
Never.
Whether it's an applicant tracking algorithm that filters out your resume because of a weird formatting quirk, or a company culture that rewards the loudest voice in a meeting rather than the best idea, systems are built on shortcuts. And shortcuts inevitably create arbitrary winners and losers.
What the Goodmans show us is that sometimes the most effective strategy for surviving a rigid, overly serious system isn't to just put your head down and accept the unfair rules. Sometimes the best strategy is to understand the mechanics of those rules so intimately that you can playfully subvert them. You hack the system by using its own logic against it.
It takes a really unique kind of creativity to look at a structural disadvantage, like the et al. Penalty, and figure out how to turn it into a source of shared power.
It really does. Which brings us to the final brilliant gesture of their paper. Because the Goodmans don't just take their victory lap and walk away, they actually issue a formal call to arms for future research.
Yeah, they explicitly implore 4 specific economists named Turner John, Leslie, Nicholas, and Sarah to find a way to collaborate.
They also call out 4 specific economists named Smith, Janet, Jeffrey, Jeremy, and Jonathan, and they suggest these 4 could explore the impact of sharing a surname and a first initial.
You can only imagine the absolute havoc a citation of J. Smith et al. Would wreak on a university database.
It would be digital chaos. They even take a moment to encourage 2 cousins in the field, Urzo F.P. Lutmer and Urzo G.J. Lutmer, to write a paper together, quote, for reasons too obvious to state.
It is just a wonderful open invitation to their entire discipline to step back, stop taking the rat race so seriously, and just embrace the sheer serendipity of their network.
It leaves you with a thought that completely upends how we usually think about our careers, you know? In a hyper-connected, hyper-optimized world where we meticulously curate our LinkedIn profiles and we constantly network with the quote-unquote right people and strategize every collaborative move, what if that optimization is actually holding us back? What if the most radical, innovative way to form your next team or tackle your next big project is to just find a few strangers who happen to share your name and see what kind of magic happens?